Hello, friends. Welcome back to How to Talk to Weirdos, where we discuss communication with people who are different than you. And since we're all unique, that's pretty much everyone. When someone has a different style of communication, they can seem like a weirdo. And if they seem that way to you, you probably seem that way to them. As I like to say, everyone's kind of a weirdo. We're going to talk about some of the assumptions that we make and other pitfalls of communication so that we can all improve. There's a lot to cover, so let's get started.
Hello and welcome back to How to Talk to Weirdos. This is the first episode of 2024. It's very exciting. I have with me today Lauren Larson. Lauren, say hello to everybody and tell us what you do.
Hi, everyone. I am currently a program manager for a large corporation, and my background and sort of how I got here is that I started in engineering and then at some point made a switch to engineering management. And then after a few years of that, worked my way into program management. So I have this unique background of having grown up as an engineer, very much an introvert, but now being in a management role, having to work directly and talk with a lot of people in my profession.
So you went from being an engineer, which frankly most people would say don't tend to be the best communicators. And then you were then a manager. When you were a manager, were you managing only engineers or some non-engineers as well?
It started as only engineers when I was an engineering manager. And then when I went into program management, I did manage not only directly, but then through the programs I was in charge of a wide variety of people, everything from contracts to people doing like operations, like mechanical type of work, manufacturing work, and engineers, the gamut.
And what have you found are differences between when you were managing, say, engineers and people who are completely non-technical?
The communication styles are definitely different. One example is when I would have meetings or get on calls with people who are traditionally engineers in general, these are generalizations, they'd be happy just diving right into the topic of the meeting. Just dive straight into the work. What are we here to discuss? Let's talk about it and then move about our days. And then the non-technical people in general are much more interested in socializing and how was your day? How was your weekend? What are you doing after work? Okay, now let's talk about the work stuff. So that's just one example of many for the differences.
I totally get it. As you know, my background's in engineering and meetings make me crazy because, I don't want to go to a meeting in the first place. And then if we're there, we might as well be getting things done. So I don't need to hear all the background of things that are not important. But I actually lived in Italy for a year and I was working with the country manager there to do a deal with the telecom company out there. And they go the exact opposite direction. We had an hour-long meeting where we really didn't talk about anything. And then at the end, they liked us enough to schedule a dinner where we could then chat for another hour and then start talking about business. So they do it very different way than I'm used to. So I learned to adapt a little bit.
Yeah, that would be tough for me.
And so what is it that you're doing now? You are having to deal with people from multiple different departments. Is that right?
That is correct.
And how is it to get people from different departments to work well together? What are some of the hurdles of that?
The group that I've been working with has been working together long enough that we've already overcome a lot of the hurdles. Like when I joined this group, they had already worked through and assimilated a lot of that. But some of it is just recognizing what type of meeting you are on and how those people operate and prefer to run their meetings or talk during the meetings. And sometimes in my role, I will on the side send a little written message to someone who might be veering off in a direction that doesn't work for the group in the meeting.
Do you discuss it ahead of time? Do you set down ground rules for the meeting?
Sometimes I do. If I know, like, for example, one of the things I do in my job is I'm a proposal manager. And whenever we kick off a new proposal, I know it's going to bring in a lot of people from across the company who might not have worked together in the past. So what I will do if I anticipate any large differences in communication style or expectations for the meeting, I will get on with them beforehand and talk about just my expectations for what is going to happen during the meeting. And if there's anything outside of that they have questions about or want to discuss, we can talk separately.
Nice. I found that just a couple minutes of setting ground rules before a meeting, especially if the people don't know each other well, just goes such a long way, because it then gives you the freedom to stop someone. If you haven't said it ahead of time, said, here's what we're going to do if someone gets off topic, we're going to write it down on this board and address it later. If you haven't set that up ahead of time and someone goes off topic and you stop them, it's not well received. But if you've told them ahead of time, it's a lot easier to do it. So I like to do that before meetings. Just let them know, here are 3 simple ground rules, and here's what's going to happen if you deviate.
Yeah, that's definitely a good strategy.
They still don't always like it, but at least they've been warned. So one of the things you had said that you were interested in talking about was how when people are making complaints, how to deal with that and how to interpret them. Yes. Can you tell me a little bit more?
Yeah. So I have found throughout my career that people would come up to me, even when I was an engineer before I got into management, people would come up to me and complain about, this tool I'm using is so efficient. Here's a great simple one. I forgot to save my work as I was working and the file crashed and I just lost 2 hours of work. So it's a complaint, and that's a small example, a minor example. And it's a complaint that's not directed at the audience. So, Jeremy, I'm not complaining to you about something you did. I'm just venting a frustration, a problem, a complaint. And my default response, younger in age and earlier in my career, was to offer a solution. Like, yes. Oh, yeah, well, you should probably hit save every 15 minutes or so. And I quickly learned that that's not always why people complain. They don't want to hear the solution. And through my career and in my personal life, I have found that there are different reasons why people complain. And it really helps to recognize that, to understand that when someone's complaining, your default type of response might not be what they're looking for, and to kind of take that pause and and we can get into tips for how to do this, but figure out what type of response might be best suited for that situation.
What are the different types of reasons, or what are the different reasons and the different types of responses people would look for?
Yeah, and so people, when they complain or state a problem, such as I just lost 2 hours of work, they are sharing it with you because they're trying to get a need met that is kind of buried under that problem. And there's actually an acronym that can be used to help remember what some of those needs are. And it's called SAVER, SAVER. So it's like, hey, you're the saver. You're going to save them from whatever's bothering them. So the S is for sympathy. So maybe they just need someone to acknowledge their feelings and provide their support. Like, oh, I lost 2 hours of work. Oh, that really sucks. I'm sorry, dude. That could be all they need.
Yeah.
The A is for advice, which again was my default response. Oh yeah, you should probably save every 15 minutes.
I'm sure that goes over really well.
For that example, no. But a different example might be, oh, I need to go talk to my boss about this difficult thing. So a specific example. Hey, I want to go talk to my boss about the work I'm doing, the type of work I'm doing, and I'm not satisfied with it. And I would really rather be doing this other thing, but I'm worried that's not going to go over well. They, depending on their relationship with you, they might be going to you with that problem because they are looking for advice. If you know the boss really well, you have a good relationship with the boss, you know the dynamics of that, they might be looking for advice and feedback and bouncing ideas off how to solve that problem. So that's the A.
So
Go ahead.
that is also my default. And I don't know if you ever read the book Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus.
No.
In the book, he basically states that that's the default of most men.
Yes.
And it's not what most women are looking for. So I'm sure it's a broad generalization, but it is my default. And I've learned to, instead of jumping to that, because I still tend to want to give the advice, is then I'll ask a question. And the question will usually let me know. I'm like, oh, what are you thinking? Or what have you tried? And if they're like, oh, I have no idea. What do you think? I'm like, great. That's my entree. So I try to suss out what they're really looking for. All right.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. What's the V?
And that way of saying that is one example of how to get to what their need is. So that's a perfect example. All right. The V, validation. So validation of their feelings or experiences, kind of to know that what they're going, like you understand what they're going through. So it's kind of like sympathy, but it's more, and again, this is more on the emotional side, but it's letting them know that it's okay to feel this way or to have this problem. And an example, let's see. I'm trying to think of a professional example, but a personal example might be someone who's trying to change a habit. Brand new year, right? New Year's resolutions. Someone's trying to change their habit. They fall off the bandwagon and they come to you and they vent and they say, I feel like such a loser. I tried to do this and I couldn't. And maybe they just need that validation. Like, yeah, habit change really is tough. I can understand why you feel that way. It's perfectly normal to feel that way. And it's okay. So it's kind of like sympathy, but it's validating that how they feel about the problem is acceptable.
And that is a problem that just about everyone feels within the next 30 days. Yep. Because the gym is pretty crowded this time of year, and it gets less and less crowded as time goes on. So we can all understand that.
Yes.
Nice.
Okay, so that was the V. The E is empathy, which again is similar to sympathy or validation. But the way I see empathy in this model is if they are looking for talking to someone who they hope can relate to their situation. So sharing a similar experience or demonstrating understanding. And if I go back to the professional example of I'm not satisfied with the work I'm doing right now, I'd much rather be doing this other thing. They might be sharing that with you not for advice, but for empathy, in which case you could share with them when you have been in a similar situation and how you felt about it. And then depending on what happens with the conversation, maybe that leads to advice or talking about how you addressed it.
Oh, so this is a point that I'm gonna let you do the R, but I wonder how often their initial need may be one thing, but then there are follow-on needs that are different. So got ahead. So tell me the R and then answer that question.
Okay, the R is resolve. So resolve their problem. They might be sharing their problem with you because they want you to actually take action in resolving it directly. And in the case of someone not being satisfied with their work, that could be talking to the boss about it directly because I want you to help me solve it, Mr. Boss.
And, you know, a thing that we've talked about in previous episodes is when people would come up to you when you're the manager and they're always asking you to resolve. And at
Yes.
some point you have to figure out how to then push that back on them and have empathy or, you know, validate, yep, it's a problem. Now let's see how you can resolve this yourself.
Yeah. And that, I think those are, we just touched on, I think 3 of the nuances are kind of the next steps in these types of scenarios. And one is, how do you eke out why they're sharing the problem with you? And the example you gave before, you know, asking for, well, how do you feel about that? Or what are your thoughts? Is one good way to do that. Sometimes I frankly just ask the people, okay, what are you looking for from me? Which is a little too direct for some people, but do you want advice? Are you just looking for support? And with people that I work with a lot more closely, I find it much easier to just be frank with them about, okay, you shared this problem. Why?
Now what?
But I usually preface that with, you know, oh, that sucks, or oh, that's really hard, or oh, yeah, I can see how that would frustrate you.
Yeah.
And then if the pause after that doesn't get them saying more to help me understand the need, that's when I ask the question. So that's one.
Do you ever kind of just rephrase their complaint back to them and see what it elicits?
Yep. Yeah. So, I mean, there are a few different things you could do. You could ask the clarifying questions, like the example you mentioned earlier. You could reflect back. And Jeremy, what I love about that one is that it shows that you were paying attention and you heard what they said. It would help clarify any misunderstandings, because if you paraphrase and reflect back, but it's not exactly what they meant, it would get them to clarify what they're actually complaining about. And if you reflect and just leave that pause after, that encourages them to expand or to continue, which would help you understand why they're sharing it with you, what their need is.
I talk about silence a lot and how making a statement or asking a question and then staying quiet for as long as you can gets a lot more information. Very powerful.
Yeah. It is so powerful.
Hard to do, but powerful.
Yes.
How often, and this may be at work or in a personal situation, does it feel like the person's complaining about you? Or how often or how difficult is it to not take it personally, what the person is saying?
I almost put that in a completely different category of complaint. And maybe that is the culture of where I work. Because every company has their unique cultures and standards for what is socially acceptable and what's not. But where I work, people very rarely will complain directly to someone in management.
Oh.
Which can be a whole different problem. But for me, the problem I actually have is when people come and complain to me about something that's tangentially related to what I do. I want to take charge and to help them and to show that I'm supporting them. And that sometimes leads to me overstepping. And so I almost have that opposite problem where I do take it personally, as in personal responsibility, and I want to help them.
So you go for the R sometimes.
I do. A little too often, and that's where I need to check myself.
Yeah, and the more well you know a person, the easier it is to just stop and ask. Like in a personal relationship, I learned, like you said, I will show some sympathy, and then I will ask, do you want advice, or do you just want me to listen? And if I don't know the person well enough, or some people are never going to be happy with that to answer. But if you know the person well and they're the right type of person, it's a great way. They're like, nope, just wanted to vent. Great. Then I'll pile on. It's fun.
Yes.
So how did you learn these things? Going from an engineer to being a manager, I know is a tough transition for a lot of people. You seem to have a lot of these skills. Did you develop them through training or through just on the job figuring it out?
A little bit of it was training when I first got into management, but that was just a very small part of it. Honestly, most of what I have learned in this space is from talking with two people in my personal life. One is my husband, because in my personal relationship, my default response was to offer advice or to try to solve the problem. And it took years of that not working for us to figure out that, oh, okay, there are different needs here. And then the other is my sister, who is a psychologist, and she and I talk very openly about the different needs and when sharing in vulnerable conversations what the needs are. And the fact that she and I have been able to very openly talk about and preface a conversation with, I just need you to hold space for me right now. Or, hey, I could use your advice going into this big family event. That has really helped me be more aware of those different needs, why people will complain or vent or be vulnerable, and brought that into my professional life. And that is one thing I actually recommend for professional, like people at work. If you are going to go vent to a peer or to someone in management or share a problem with them, sometimes it helps to preface that with, I just need to vent right now and I just need you to listen. Or, hey, I have a problem and I could really use your advice.
Mm-hmm.
Those little things just help the conversation go so much easier. So on the sharing side, that is definitely one thing that anyone can do to help with those conversations.
As a manager, I have always thought to myself that it's my responsibility. If the communication goes poorly for whatever reason, it's my responsibility. But then as, the person talking to a manager, I always think it's my responsibility as well. So communication is such a two-way street that everyone should take the responsibility as if it's all their responsibility. And then if both people are doing that, then you'll, at least get halfway there and make it easier.
Yes, definitely.
And how often do you take lessons that you learn from work and bring them home?
Probably almost as often.
Yeah.
Being at work and just the wide variety of people that I interact with and the different situations, including those where there's some people who they're an open book. There are some people who will just hide all their frustrations, and it takes a lot to get anything out of them that will help work with them and help them work through problems. And then there are some people who it blows up in what seems like a yelling match, and you're going to be worst enemies and not talk for a week, but then 20 minutes later, you're fine and you've worked through it and everything's good. You're moving forward. And having been through that at work has really helped at home to just be able to balance and navigate those different types of interactions.
Yep. I'm the youngest of 10 kids, as you know, and there are quite a variety of personality types, but, and this is another stereotype, but we grew up Irish and Catholic, and so the complaints were very minimal. And our conversations at dinner may have been like fun and raucous, but there were never people yelling. And then I've been to people from other cultures, and I'm like, why is everybody fighting? They're like, oh no, that's just how we talk at dinner. I'm like, oh my God, it seems so stressful. You're all yelling. They're like, oh yeah, that's just how we do it. I'm like, all right. But as you said, there's some people who the comment of, I'd prefer not to be doing this right now is a really big statement. that they're very uncomfortable and they're miserable. And some people will kick and scream and moan and complain, and they're really just doing it to, for the fun of it. So it's tough to navigate when people are so different.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And one other thing in management that I have found a challenge to navigate with the different people and personalities. And again, as a manager, taking responsibility for the communication and the effectiveness of it is if they come expecting or with what they think they need, sympathy, for example, or validation, but you've worked with them long enough and this problem, they need something else and they don't recognize that yet. And part of the challenge of management is to help them identify what they truly need and not what they thought they needed as part of addressing that problem. And that goes kind of back to what I think you were saying a few minutes ago, Jeremy, that, well, they might come to you wanting you to resolve their problem for them, but that's not what they really need.
Yeah. And sometimes they just want sympathy when they kind of need a kick in the butt to go solve it.
Yeah, exactly.
So some of both. It's good to recognize both.
Yes.
Are there any other management topics that you want to talk about before we start to wrap up?
No, I think that's good for today.
All right. That's a good one because we're getting close to the end. So it's going to have to be quick anyway.
All right.
So I end with 3 standard questions. The first one has nothing to do with any of this, but it is, what is a place you have traveled and loved? And part B is a place that you haven't been to yet but want to go.
Oh, man. All right. The favorite vacation that I ever did was a live-aboard scuba diving cruise off the coast of Belize.
Oh, nice.
And I would love to do that again. And it doesn't even have to be that same spot in the world. As long as we are living on a boat and spend 3 hours a day in the water, I'm happy.
Oh, you actually lived on the boat?
Yes, we lived on the boat for
fun.
a week and we did 5 dives every day. So it was actually closer to 5 hours in the water a day.
Wow.
And it was amazing. And what I love about that and why I would want to go back is underwater is such a different world on this same planet. And I got to truly experience that only that one time and would love to do it again.
Nice. What's a place you have not yet been but want to go?
Any other continent. I've never been outside of North America.
Ah, all right.
I would probably start in Europe in ideally a rural town or village in any of the European countries, but I would love to go anywhere else in the world.
All right. I'll put it on your bucket list.
It's there.
Great. What is, or who is a person who you think is a great communicator? Can be in your personal life or a public figure.
So I do have to say my husband, Pete, because he is willing to have the most candid and vulnerable conversations with me. And not only with me, but with other people, he is so great at making them feel comfortable so that they can open up and have real conversations and feel trusted and feel safe. And I don't know if people typically think of that as being good at communicating, but it is a skill that I really admire.
Yeah, it would be nice if everyone could do more of that. Make the world a better place. And my last question is, what is one piece of communication advice you think we could all benefit from?
Okay. So I think others have said essentially the same thing, but you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. So aim to listen more than you talk and do that to truly listen. Don't assume that you know what they're going to say or what they need, or prepare to speak yourself. So more time listening and truly listening.
It's been said multiple times because it's so true and it's so needed. So that's a good one. All right, Lauren, thank you so much for being with us today. I am going to put in the show notes how people can reach out to you. But I just want to say thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, this was fun. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of How to Talk to Weirdos. Hopefully you found it both interesting and useful. If either of those things is true, please share. Do you have a friend or a coworker who could benefit from listening? Maybe a family member you're going to be spending the holidays with? Please send them a link to your favorite episode and see if your conversations don't get just a little bit easier. I would really appreciate it. Thank you so much and have a great week.